Hey, I'm back. This is Chandler for Melda Production, and I thought I'd continue talking about some of the modules and some of the things in MSoundfactory. So if you haven't checked out the video I did last week, check that out. You're probably wondering, what is MSoundfactory? And it's an unreleased synth from Melda Productions. It's not out yet, but hopefully it will be sometime later this year. I don't know exactly when though, so don't ask me about that. But until that time, I'm trying to put out some videos to show you kind of what it can do and some of the features it has. It has lots of features, so I thought I can't do them all in one video, so I'll do it in a series. So let's get started. So last week I went over the oscillator here. So it looks like just a normal oscillator. If you click this, you can pop any of these out. You know, it's just a saw wave. Nothing particularly interesting about that, although there's lots of interesting things you can do about it. But I thought today we'd talk about the Oscillator Shaper. And you're probably wondering, like, what is the Oscillator Shaper? And I had the same thing when I first saw it. I was like, what is this? But it's actually a way that you can kind of transform and wave shape a sound. And so here's the oscillator, and I'll show you the Oscillator Shaper here. Okay? So they almost look the same. And so for this, let's switch it to a sine wave. I believe it works better for that. I'll switch them both to sine waves. And so when I have this on at first, if I play something, it just sounds like a sine wave. So you're probably thinking like, it's not doing anything. So if I have it here and bypass it, it sounds the same, it's just a little bit louder with this on. But I'll show you actually what it can do and what the difference is. So you see here the volume for the oscillator. If I start to move this up while I'm playing it, you notice, oh, it kind of changes. And to make this a little bit more apparent, let's use an oscilloscope. Is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure. But I have one here. And so what we can do is just pop this out and go back to the generator. And if we look here, it looks like a sine wave. Now let's move it up in volume. So you see the shape actually changes. And not only that, we can use a different shape here in the Oscillator Shaper. And if you notice, this looks almost exactly the same as the oscillator. There's just a few things missing. So one, the pitch isn't there because it doesn't matter. This acts actually more as like a wave shaper, like a filter almost, where you're processing something. So it can't make a sound by itself. So it doesn't need that. And also the unison is gone. But let's move on and let's try a few different shapes. So here is the triangle wave. Let's try a few more. Let's try the rectangle. This one will start changing rather quickly. And let's just do one more here. Let's try sine power 8. So these are really interesting because to me they sound similar to what you get out of FM synthesis, except the difference is FM synthesis is sometimes a little bit difficult. You have to match up the ratios and make sure everything's in tune, whereas this you really don't. There's no tuning of it. You can easily just go in here and create this type of sounds that you want. And not only can you use these shapes here, you could also load in your own shapes using this if you wanted to load in whatever wave shape you want. And also you can do it by harmonics here. So I'll give you an example. If you go in here, let's say we have organs, right? So I just clicked on one and like here's an example of one, or let's try seeing which one's interesting. Maybe this, okay? And if we do the same thing, you'll be able to get a different sound. So you can see there's all sorts of different shapes we can do with this. And this is interesting, but you're probably thinking like, okay, well, that's not interesting, but what else can I do with this that might be interesting? So you see here, there's also this pulse width modulation and other things. So let's say if I do this, let me turn this up a little bit. And it's not just pulse width modulation, there's a bunch of other different algorithms in here. So let me show you something. So let's say one of those like growl basses you hear in some modern EDM. Let's try this asymmetrical sync windowed like this. And let's try this again. Okay. But we can do more than that. We could actually do some modulation here. So let's try bend. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Now, let's see. This is cool, but I kind of want to modulate some stuff here. So I'll leave this as it is, but let's modulate these two. So let's move it down so it sounds like a bass. Here. Sounds pretty good. Now let's go into here and let's add maybe an envelope like this. Okay. Open the envelope up and do a little bit of modulation here. Adjust the attack, adjust the decay, turn the sustain down, and then just move the range up here. Let's hear how this sounds. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. I can move it up a little bit more. Okay, I'm liking that sound. Now let's do the same thing with the bend. So all I have to do is just go in here, same setting to envelope 1. Now just move it a little bit. See, already there, like I have something I like. And then if I think, okay, I want it a little bit wider because obviously I can use the unison here, but it's not going to sound good if I do that. If I do that, it's going to sound like a mess, like this. Actually, that didn't sound that bad. I expected it to sound terrible, but that's actually okay. Sometimes it doesn't work. So if I didn't have that, I could go in here and just use the M Doubler, which is a new plugin, which I did a video about last week, I believe. So I can just go in here and do something like this. So that's pretty cool. So you're probably thinking like, okay, that's cool, but is it just good for things like that, like modern EDM sounds? But it's not. You can use it for other things. Using it just for the transients of something also sounds really good. Actually, one thing before I go into that, I should say here I used a sine wave, and the reason is I think this sounds better with less complicated waveforms. Things like a saw wave get really messy really easily, so if I change this to a saw, it's probably not going to sound good. It's okay, but it sounds a little bit messy. And same thing with the rectangle. It actually sounds cooler than I thought, but you see it kind of loses some of the timbre. It's really high-endy. That's not even a word. Trebly, I should say. But if you change it to like a triangle, it sounds a little bit better, at least in my opinion. So it's similar to FM synthesis in that sense. But unlike FM synthesis, it doesn't produce as many inharmonic tones, so I think it's easier to work with. But I'll give you another example, one that I've been doing recently. So here, I tried to do an electric piano. So you see here, it's very easy. I'm just using an oscillator with a sine wave. I have the Oscillator Shaper. I have a filter. And then this is just to control the volume. I'll show you what it actually looks like, the actual device. So here we go. Simple. So I'll let you hear what it sounds like. Okay, so I probably clipped a little bit there, hit it a little bit too hard, but I think you get the idea. So you see here just basic controls for the envelope, and then on top of that I have the tremolo down here. So if I kind of move this up here, get the tremolo effect. And if I add stereo phase, you get a little bit more stereo width like this. And if you don't want that, of course, on the FX page, there's other things here like a stereo chorus. And a reverb. But enough about that. You probably don't care about that. You're probably wondering, like, okay, that's cool, but what about this tone here? So this changes the different oscillator shapers, so you can get different sounds out of it. So this one, which you've heard before. Move this here. Another one. Here. So all these sound a little bit different, and you're wondering, like, okay, how did you do that? But it's actually fairly simple. All I did was change the oscillator shape and change the volume amount and the envelope to get these different sounds. So look here, like the first one looks like this. And all of them have just slightly different variations that create a big difference in tone. So this, I hope, is a good showing of what the Oscillator Shaper can do. There's a lot of things you can do with this, and you see here I'm using the Harmonics, and there's all sorts of different things you can do with this. You can even load your own things and analyze your own stuff here in the generator if you want. So if you want to analyze your own wave file to create your own unique oscillator shape, you can do that. And another good thing about this is, although I'm using an oscillator here, you don't actually have to use an oscillator, so you don't need to use a sine wave. You could use a sample or anything really and send it through here. And although this really can't do unison well, there is actually a way, if you want to do that, that you can do a real unison with this. And also you can put a filter instead of after the oscillator shaper, you can put it before, or do all sorts of interesting and unique things here. So you can manipulate the wave in all sorts of interesting ways. So I say, if I were you, I would try to use it like FM synthesis and try it with all sorts of different envelopes and things to create your own unique sounds. But that's it for today. I hope I gave you a good idea of what this can do. If you have any questions about it, leave those below. If you have any other questions about MSoundfactory, leave those below, and I'll try to answer them if I can. But until next time, subscribe if you haven't. Check out all the other plugins at meldaproduction.com, and until next time, see you.